Today we're going to go right into the wisdom side, because yesterday we did the compassion side, and we'll sort of run back and forth through the whole thing. But the third major element is the wisdom one. And it's introduced usually by saying that even if you have the transcendent renunciative mind of dropping out of all kind of mundane preoccupations, and therefore have that initial compassion for yourself, an initial sense of personal freedom, it comes with that. And then second, building on that, you go toward including other beings in the situation of suffering and seeking release from suffering with you through the compassion meditation. Even if you have achieved those two things, where you have the spirit of enlightenment of love and compassion for all beings, and you have the feeling of transcendent renunciation and freedom from the mundane orientation, those two by themselves will not enable you to find freedom from suffering or find nirvana. In order to find nirvana, you have to develop transcendent wisdom, prajna paramita, and perfect wisdom. And in order to find that, and so therefore that is in a way the most important thing. Everything really leads to that. Although the orientation with which you come to that is also important, so that's why the other two are necessary. You have to come to it with the feeling of freedom and seeking freedom, and with that kind of level of intensity and focus and dedication. And two, you have to come to it with the sense of compassion and the spirit of enlightenment, where you want to include all other beings in the freedom that you seek. And you don't want to seek freedom for yourself alone. So that's where we are now, and we are about to embark on the subject of wisdom, which is thought of as the hardest subject, but actually it isn't really that terribly difficult. It's difficult to really realize it and really bring it deep into sort of viscerally realize it, but it's not that terribly difficult to understand discursively or inferentially, which is the essential prerequisite to begin the practice of it, actually. You mustn't think that philosophical insight is just some sort of irrelevant intellectual thing. It isn't real Dharma practice, because actually it is the foundation of Dharma practice. Amongst the wisdoms, prajna, there are said to be three types, and three levels, or you could say, are three types of wisdom. The first type of wisdom is called wisdom born of learning. The second type of wisdom is called the wisdom born of critical reflection. And the third type of wisdom is called the wisdom born of concentrated meditation. And they have to be built up one on another. If you try to go straight to concentrated meditation without having learned anything about what delusory views might be, without having critically reflected over what are delusory and what are realistic views, then your focused, concentrated meditation will not aim at the target, which is the real ignorance that causes suffering. So that is, now we're embarking on that, That's the third of the three main principal segments of the Mahayana path, is the path of transcendent wisdom. Now, you remember when we talked about the Four Noble Truths, we talked about the second Noble Truth, which is the truth of the origination of suffering. And we ran through, in our minds, even meditated a little bit, on what that is, and what that consists of. And that the main cause of the suffering, the real origin of all suffering, is said to be ignorance. And then derived from ignorance comes greed and hatred, which are also considered a desire, greed, craving, whatever you want to call it, which are closely connected, but the real root of them all is this ignorance. And I don't even like the translation ignorance. The Sanskrit word is avidya, which is why people call it ignorance. Vidya means knowledge, and avidya therefore means non-knowledge. But in the commentators and the teachers in the tradition usually gloss that avidya as asatvidya, which means knowledge of what is not the case, or knowledge of what is not real. And therefore I like to translate it as misknowledge, which is actually a word in the dictionary, not a very common one, like misunderstanding. It's like something that you know, that you think you know, and it feels like it's real because, like, I know that. But actually it's illusory. And actually it's a delusion, so you're knowing it wrongly. You're knowing it erroneously. And therefore, this being the root of all of our suffering, this misknowledge, wisdom is said to be the wisdom that sees through that misknowledge. Now, what is that misknowledge? Now, ignorance, like none of us know how many fish are in that river there. And actually, it's not really a problem for us. And the fact that we don't know that is not a harmful ignorance, really. I mean, unless we were depending for our livelihood on it or whatever, or we were environmentalists seeking to restore the fish population, there might be a reason to try to count the fish. But basically, for the most part, it doesn't really matter to us whether we know or don't know the number of fish there. What does matter to us is what we think is real around us and what we think we are. And the Buddha's insight was that each of us thinks that each of us has some sort of core essence, which we might think of as our soul, or we might think of as our mind, or we might think of as our consciousness. It depends upon what sort of worldview we have. And we feel that that is our personal core essence. It's like our core identity. It's our core substantiality. It's our core reality. The Buddhists have terms for these things. They call it intrinsic identity, intrinsic reality, intrinsic selfhood, really. So that when I go like, I'm Bob, I'm myself, when I sort of hit self, I feel like I'm hitting a real Bob there. And that sense of being the real Bob and being undeniably myself, so to speak, is the core misknowledge that causes all my suffering in the Buddha's analysis. Okay? Now, going along with that, too, there is a sense that I have about the iPod there, or the rock, or the ground, or the sky, that's the real iPod, that, there's something in the iPod that iPod lands on, an intrinsic essence of iPod, an intrinsic identity of iPod through which my term iPod or concept iPod identifies that thing. There's an intrinsic rockness in the rock. There's an intrinsic earthness in the earth. There's an intrinsic skyness in the sky, which is not just a construct in my mind, but is an objective thing. It's intrinsically objective. You follow me? It's like, therefore, when I see the rock, it is not like I don't co-create the rock. The rock is sort of there when I don't look at it. It's there out of its own essence. It also doesn't depend on being compared to the sand next to it or the water flowing past it. It has an essence of rockness in it that makes it what it is. For example, this is very prevalent in human science, for example. It's only 100 years or a little more than 100 years that scientists in the West, for example, decided that there was no such thing as an atom, as originally, what the word atom means indivisible. And so the Greek concept of an atom was that there's some building block in nature that is itself absolutely irreducible and indivisible. And it's like the final element. There's no way it can break apart. It's therefore established out of itself. And you cannot divide it into its parts. You follow me? Only with quantum physics really did the atom sort of dissolve under analysis. And we realized that an atom itself is a relational construct in science. And actually, science has not, in practical terms, really caught up with that. They think there's the real atom of this and the real atom of that. And then they think the quantum physics people are kind of crazy hippies, with their 10 dimensions and their wave particle paradox and all their weird things. They think they're kind of like poets or something, And if you ever notice, they dress differently, the quantum people. And they all look like Californians, They're all relaxed. They don't have that suit and tie thing like the regular physicists, who are creating bombs or whatever. So the point is now let's meditate on this. Now, that was talking. Now we'll meditate. Now we're going to, because I want you have to understand viscerally what I'm talking about this notion of intrinsic identity. And this is a very special Tibetan thing that I have not seen, although there are Indian philosophers, Buddhist philosophers, who get close to this, especially Chandrakirti, the great disciple of Nagarjuna, or a commentator of Nagarjuna. But you don't find it written in this sort of practical meditative way, but it's really a Tibetan thing, like personal lineage precept. So, okay, now go into meditative mode. Here we're sitting. And, remember, Guru Rinpoche is all around, and Buddha, Shakyamuni, and Tsongkhapa, and Dalai Lama, and Jesus, and whatever, Plato, Socrates, great philosophers and scientists throughout history, and sages and saints and yogis. And we're here, okay, and we're in our high alert mode, and we're highly, focused, and we're ready for different insights. And we remember now, we don't even have to rehearse it really, but, it's good just for a good omen to go through it. We've already had some insight about the preciousness of our human existence. We've already had insight about the immediacy of death. We've already had insight about the inexorability of causation. We've already had insight about the suffering attendant upon the alienated sense of personality and the unenlightened mode of living. And then also we've decided that we're interwoven with other beings. We've seen the motherhood and the familiarity of all beings, and we have gone through the steps of mother recognition, kindness, remembrance, grateful wish to repay, lovely love, universal compassion, and universal responsibility, and finally the spirit of enlightenment of wanting to become a Buddha for the sake of all beings. We've gone through all of that. And therefore we're really glowing, and everybody's really happy with us, and now we're coming to the wisdom topic. And where we begin meditating on wisdom is by realizing what its target is. Its target is knowing the real nature of things. So if we're going to meditate on that, and we're going to develop that ability to know the real nature of things, the first thing we have to do is inventory our own current structure of mind and our own current mental attitude and outlook and view, and we're going to have to find out what we now think is real. It would be idle of us to just think of reading some philosophy and say, oh, well, that's what they think is real, without first inventorying what we now think is real so that we can sort of match up what we learn with what we actually think, or how we actually feel. And here they say that we perform a very delicate and subtle meditative operation. And namely, we use our memory. Remember a time, as you're meditating, when you were falsely accused by someone. Someone thought your roommate, your friend, your mate, husband or wife, your son, your daughter, your parent, they came charging up to you and blamed you for something for which you are not to blame. You did not actually do it. They were mistaken. They were falsely accusing you. Try to remember such a time. It doesn't have to be a parent. It could be anyone. Traffic cop, Now, when you remember that experience, you remember yourself in a state of righteous indignation, of injured innocence. And now you have to remember that before you go right into that and try to remember in detail that experience, that uncomfortable experience. You have to be prepared with a certain special way of approaching the memory. That is to say, when you remember that feeling of how you felt, sort of just before you became angry even that you were being accused, and when you were kind of just amazed that anyone would think you had done whatever that is, or you were to blame for whatever that was. You have to observe yourself and your state in that memory as if you were a spy or a bystander who was sort of apart from the main action. In other words, with a very subtle witness portion of your memory awareness. Do you follow me? In remembering, in other words, you want to relive the experience as much as possible with your main awareness. So your main awareness should be just remembering how injured, innocent you were, and how indignant you were actually at having been wrongly accused. That's what you want to really remember. And then just a little corner of your mind, you want to observe yourself feeling that way. You follow me? It's a very interesting meditative technique. The reason is if you go into the memory looking for how you felt with your main awareness, sort of analyzing how you were feeling, then you can't really feel the memory. You won't really go into it because you'll be watching yourself do it, and then you won't really, your full sense of your righteous self-indignation will not emerge, even in the memory. So you won't really get the point of this beginning of the wisdom meditation. You follow this now? Carefully remember, therefore, in this subtle way, when you felt in that instance, I did not, I am not, I am innocent, I am right, you are wrong. Relive it whenever it was, that big argument or that whatever it was, or even just that state of shock that such and such a person would ever think that you had such and such or did such and such or whatever. And just feel it fully. Maybe someone insulted you. If you remember carefully, if it was a particular incident where after a while, when the accuser persisted and didn't accept your protestations of innocence, you then became angry, actually furious. Try not to follow into the time of when you felt furious. You might discover that you can't remember yourself well once you get furious, because you lose self-awareness actually once you're really furious. And you're just lost, so in a way you don't remember how you were that well. So you want it in the threshold before you got furious, when you were just injured, innocent, indignant. If you really do this well, you might feel a little pulse increase. You might feel a little flush. You might get back into the emotions of horror that you are being thus accused. This is known as the first key of 4 keys of meditating on selflessness, it is said, of wisdom meditation. And this key is known as identifying the negatee, the thing to be negated, by the expression of selflessness, by the insight of selflessness. Because, and now I'm distracting you from the memory, from the witnessing of the memory, but if you remembered a little bit and you did it and you relived it a little bit, one thing you now can know is that at that time, your sense of self completely filled you up. It was like coming from an absolute, undisputable and undeniable center of your being, your state of innocence, your sense of self-assertion. It was when it was like I did not, that I really felt rooted in a feeling of your sort of central being. If someone had said, what is your ego type thing, you would have felt that's my ego. And that's that, and you're darn right it is, type of thing. That's me, that's Bob, I didn't do it. I know, you see. So that, and even if it's a very dire accusation, if it was a very emotional encounter that you remember, there's almost a feeling as if you're practically having a kind of asthma attack, or you're choking, or your diaphragm feels all tense, and you're feeling maybe a choking sensation in your throat, and you flush and maybe stutter, or maybe you can't quite speak clearly at first. You have to kind of clear your throat because you're so choked on the feeling of filling up, like an energy just pumps up out of you, out of a sense of it comes right out of your central being. Since you feel that your central being is being assaulted and you're defending it. So that, if you succeeded in doing it, and if you did not, then one should spend a long time meditating on that, in trying to practice meditation on wisdom. Because that feeling of an absolute, solid, substantial, undeniable, indisputable, self-sufficient self-center, that feeling is the root misknowledge. That which seems to be absolutely, unquestionably known by us as the core of our being is actually a misknowledge, according to the Buddha and the Buddhist psychological tradition. But what we note by meditating this first key is that is not so according to us. Meaning me, Bob Thurman, Buddha tells me, oh, Bob, you're selfless. You don't have that kind of absolute self-centered Bobness in there. There's no such thing. It's a construct of your habit. I don't feel that way, actually. I might say, to be polite, oh, yes, Buddha. But actually, I don't feel that. I feel he's like, I don't know what he's talking about, actually. Because I feel that I'm me. Come on, I feel more like Descartes. And I don't doubt that I'm here, even if I'm doubting. I know it's me doubting. And I know I'm innocent, and I know I'm this, and I know I'm that, and I know I'm here. I can't doubt that. So I don't agree with Buddha, I realize. And that realization and that visceral sense of the absolute self-presence, of the I referent, the intrinsic referentiality of my I essence, my ego essence. All kinds of terminologies they have developed, so sophisticated, so brilliant and lucid, their terminology of describing this. So I own up to the fact that I disagree, in fact, with Buddha. Because I feel I'm me, I'm here, and there's no question about it. That's the first key. So Buddha's teaching is so fascinating that obviously, therefore, that's why. Remember, I early on said that Buddha doesn't just say you have to believe something, because that doesn't do any good. Because what he's teaching, he knows you don't believe. And if you artificially sort of force yourself into belief based on some sort of subservience to authority, what you would be thinking was that, oh, I'm a no self, and you would think that you're just nothing or something like that, that you're really nothing. So you would ascribe that absolute sense of something being present to a nothing being present. And that would be a very terrible mistake. So he knows we don't believe, and therefore Buddha's teaching is a challenge to us. But he does expect us to take up that challenge by being sensible people. Why? I feel I'm absolutely here, and I'm me, I'm Bob. Some being who seems to have some insight, who, seems to have ability, knowledge, who seems to know other things that, I've noticed, says that way I feel, that way that I feel so absolutely certain about is wrong. So that then challenges me to verify whether I'm right or that challenger is right. So how do I verify? I investigate. Okay, I feel I'm absolutely here. If I'm absolutely here, and I am an agent, I'm an ego, I'm a being, an active being, I'm a present being, and therefore I exert myself with all my might, which itself is might of an absolute being, therefore it can be really in some way an absolute might, comes out of an absolute being. I should absolutely discover myself and prove Buddha wrong. If putting my absolute effort into it, the diamond cutting awareness, investigative awareness, like the drill known as the diamond cutting wisdom, if I put that into it and don't find anything, if this sense of self, absolute self that I have in there turns out to be based on something that cannot be found, then I will have to reconsider my sense of certainty, obviously. But I'm not just going to arbitrarily say, oh, well, I must be wrong, when I really don't feel I'm wrong. You follow me? So the second key is, of the four keys, is making a commitment to investigate and to coming up with an outcome of that investigation. Not getting lost in an endless investigation process, but coming up with an outcome. That is, either I will find it, and that will verify the absoluteness of my self-presence, self-existence, or I won't find it, and then I will have to turn my questioning against my own sense of certainty. I call that the commitment to binariness, binarity, on or off, yes or no. Then the third key, which we now will move to, is I noticed from my investigating about my absolute feeling of self that my bobness, when it rises up in tide, like choking me with fullness of myself, that it seems like a unit. It seems something like an absolute thing that's indivisible. It's like the real me. It's not like some sort of relational composite. It's an absolute. And that is how I experience it. So therefore I want to look through my body-mind processes with as great a degree of detail and an analytic refinement that I can muster. So for doing this, I have a useful schema, like a blueprint of the body-mind complex, that the Buddhists over thousands of years of doing this meditation have developed, known as the 5 aggregates of the body and mind. And these 5 aggregates, skanda, literally the 5 heaps, or the 5 piles, but people usually translate as aggregate, or I say system, sometimes I like to say. The first system is the physical system. And the physical system, so you do now what is called a body scan. I want to look through my physical system to see if I can find that absolute Bob in there, that I feel is in there in those certain moments. So this is defined by the Buddhists as the 5 senses and the 5 sense fields or objects. And in that sense, the whole skin is the sense of touch. And even internal membranes that have nerves are the sense of touch. The hearing, sense of hearing, sight in the eye, smell in the nose, taste in the tongue. And somehow all the surfaces of the body are included in those 5 senses, the way the Buddhists analyze the physical thing. And then There are other things that where there is no nerves, but are like objects like a bone, or some bones have no nerves, some do, or like the ground underneath, or like the tree I see, or the rock I see over there, inanimate objects, and they are actually part of my physical process. It's interesting, the boundary is not just the skin, where you look through your body, but your body includes your sense fields, the way the Buddhists meditatively analyze it. So I go through all of the sense data that I have in my awareness. You meditate, you scan through them. You scan through your body's interior, your feet, your toes, the bones, the blood flowing, the nerves, the lymphatic system, the organs, stomach, intestine, kidneys. You go up and down the spine, you come to the head, you have the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the skin. Inside you have bones, the skeleton. Inside that you have the brain, and the brain sort of comes up the tree-like stem from up the backbone, and then it flowers into the brain, the nervous system does. And then the brain has all those kind of neurons in it, synapses. You can get as micro as you want. You can also go to the cellular level, the atomic level, depending on what different schemas you may have in your mind about your physical body and physical processes. And it's in a way easy for us because we all have some sense of anatomy and we have some sense of molecules and cells, and we know that we studied some biology. Looking through all of that, is there anything in all of that that's the real Bob as a physical thing? And when I really do this scan, you are shocked to find that there's no real Melissa, no real Brent, no real Clark, no real Susan. You can't find it as a physical thing. It's like not engraved on a particular vertebra. There's no Bob written there. It's not somehow in the chest, even though when I go I think it's kind of comes from my diaphragm or something. It's not even that, and there's no one neuron that has Bob written on it. And actually, there's no stable thing that's a neuron anyway. Neuron is made of atoms. They're made of subatomic energies in particles. Finally, the subatomic energies in particles, we don't know if they're waves or particles, or nobody knows what they are. Really. They maybe have 10 dimensions beyond the 4 of space and time, which we have no way of visualizing. So we don't even know. But anyway, there's no Bob in there. It's pretty easy to scan through it all at the micro, macro, meso levels and decide that the Bob is not a physical entity. The unit, that is to say the absolute unit Bob, unit Brenda, unit Mitch, unit, that unit is not any physical thing. We can come to a decision like that. We will fail to find it. And we say, well, okay, we didn't think it was. I knew that. So then we go the next step from the physical that they feel is useful for us to look at. We go to the sensational system, meaning sensations. And as we've gone around in the body, as you inventory, like if you scan your hip bone, your butt, your thigh muscle, however you're sitting, your knees, the ankle bone under the thigh, if you're sitting cross-legged, there's either like a feeling of pain or a feeling of pleasure, or you're not having any particular feeling. It's like numb or indifferent. And so going along with all the physical processes, the first sort of step of sentience is sensation. And there's no sensation that is Bob. I can't find one sensation of Bobness when I look through all the sensational system processes. That's pretty easy. Then the third level of aggregate that's not so easy is the level known as the conceptual, cognitional or conceptual aggregation or system. And I do have an ID Bob. I have an idea Bob. I have a word Bob. I have a word ego. I have a word self. Those are all in my conceptual cloud of concepts, cloud of language that sort of swirls around in my awareness. And, I hear voices and I hear words and I can go and pronounce. I have like a dictionary somewhere in there. I can consult. And I do have a word Bob. But is the word itself the referent of itself? I start to look at that kind of issue. Does ego refer to just the word ego? We know that Bob is not written anywhere. There's no sort of text in there in the body, so that the word can be the pronunciation of what's written as a text that might be the referent of the pronounced word. Even look at the word Bob. Is Bob really in Bob? Where's Bob? Is it when I think Bob before I go bleh? Is it in the ah when I'm in the middle between the B's? It is when I go bleh and I end it? Is it when the echo of the when I end the b? When I use the second B as a stop, as they say linguistically, Bob. The word will dissolve under analysis, actually. Not only its referent, but the word itself. If my idea of myself is myself as a guy, American guy, doing this, doing that, this age, this and the other, am I seeing myself from above or below or from within, or as an atomic phenomenon, or as a snapshot that Brent took on my last trip to Bhutan, or whatever, or in a police lineup, or my barcode or social security number, where it all kind of unravels. All these different flashes and images and aspects and facets, none of them have that unitary, stable, absolute Bobness as a concept. They're just concepts and words that go here and there, but there's no thing to which they intrinsically exist, to which they refer. I can't find it. But that takes a little work, because if we think, aha, yes, the idea Bob, that's the real thing. But then I can't really ground that idea. And the idea can't be grounded in itself. Then it would not have meaning, would not have reference. So then I go to emotions. And when I was feeling that, I remember back when I recognized my being injured, innocent, I'm Bob, I'm the innocent Bob. I'm the right Bob, you're wrong. I'm right. There was an emotional feeling of being right, of being sort of sure, of being like absolutely there, right there, And maybe that's an emotion. Maybe that's what Bob is. It's like an emotion. But wait. But then I go into my emotional system. And I go to my emotional system, and can I find something solid that's the emotion of being me? Not really, because that time I was sort of angry. I was indignant. I was like, and then how does anger differ from indignance? And where does it differ from sort of hurt feelings and injured innocence? And there's can you find real line, a boundary between those that really absolutely makes any one of them an absolute thing? No. Then who's feeling it? Is there something there that's feeling those ways? Where is that feeling? Well, I felt something choking feeling in my chest. I felt something in my throat. I made some sounds, came out of my lungs, modulated by my tongue and teeth and lips. But like where in there, another emotion was like the real Bob thing, that's the solid thing. That will dissolve under analysis as an emotion. So then I reject all of that. I come to finally the subtlest layer of my body-mind system, my consciousness itself. And my consciousness itself, let me look at that. Now, when I was being injured innocent, of course, I was seeing things. I was talking to the person. I was seeing their face who were accusing me. I was hearing the stupid things they were telling me, and they were making me mad. I was smelling their nasty smell. I was tasting what I had for breakfast. I was feeling the clothes on my back, the wind in my face. And so those consciousness was distributed all through all kind of those irrelevant things. And so there were none of those kind of consciousnesses that are woven in with stimuli and sense data none of that could be Bob. The Bob that's innocent. The Bob that's the absolute. But wait, there's a witness watching all of that. That seems unitary. Because when I remember it now, I feel like I'm the same observer as I'm remembering myself observing being wrongly accused in that memory. And when I eat breakfast, I'm the same me who's aware of myself eating breakfast as I am when I'm eating lunch, and I'm the same when I was in school. But am I the same? Is that sense of awareness really unitary? Well, let me verify. So then I turn my awareness back to my awareness. And I don't just lightly do that. I strongly swing that awareness away from all the other secondary things, and I turn back against that awareness. But the minute I turn back against that awareness, and I seem to elude myself, Well, of course I do, because actually my awareness has now, my main awareness, the unitary one, the real Bob awareness, has jumped around to be observing the Bob awareness. So it can't see itself because now it's looking for itself. But wait, I'll jump back and catch it again. And wait, I'll jump again. I'll jump again. Jump and turn. And suddenly I start spinning. In your meditation now you should be spinning inside. Spinning your awareness on a dime, on a point. On an absolute XYZ point of self. That unitary self that you solidly feel is now hotly pursuing itself in a spinning, almost like spinning in place. Because like a dog chasing its tail, every time it turns on itself, it can't find itself because it's the one that's turning. And yet it feels solid that it's there turning. Can you get there a little? Even by intimation, by hint, can you get to this inner turning point? If you do, you've reached the point of the diamond drill awareness, of the deepest part of your consciousness. You've reached a point where it takes real effort to stay focused on. You want to veer off this and that way, like a top spinning on its tip. It wants to flop over. It doesn't want to keep the momentum of its top on its tip only keeps it up there for a certain time, then it flops over but now you want to keep that spinning on that point. This is where then you need one-pointed concentration. You need meditative prowess and skill and expertise to really be able to hold this point. This is the crucial point of your life. This is the crucial point of your worldview. This is the crucial point of discovering reality, because you have come to the point of yourself that you feel is absolutely you, undeniably you, your witness awareness at the deepest level. And you're not just, of course you feel it there, but you want to find out how you're feeling it. You want to verify that you're feeling it. You're right in the point here where the great genius Descartes arrived. And Descartes copped out here, which you don't want to do. Because he said, I can't find myself, the absolute self that I'm sure is here. I can't find it when I look for it, because I'm looking as an object. I'm looking with it as a subject, for it as an object. But it is only a subject. It never is an object. And therefore, of course, I can't find it. But therefore, even though I can't find it, I'm sure that it's the absolute thing that's there. That's where the error was made. Because what does it mean to you, absolute? You could have a habit of being sure about something that you could be wrong about. So therefore, if you can't find it, you have to put into question your feeling of certainty that you're there. If you can't verify yourself, you've already made a commitment to be honest with yourself in that way and not to cop out. So you're spinning now, and you're spinning, and you're spinning. Subject looking for object, being the 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 subject looking for object. In most difficult effort in the core of the mind and spirit that a human being, that a sentient being can make, and only human being or some type of God is really capable of this complex spinning and drilling and this diamond drill, this effort. It's a unique thing that only you can do in the scale world of evolution. And now when you do this with your full concentrated effort, what does happen is that diamond, like drills on diamond, and actually the two diamond tip drills drilling against each other and held completely stable and drilling. And what happens when the two diamonds, there is tremendous heat, and then there is light, and then there is dust, and both tips dissolve, and then their atoms dissolve, and then their subatomic energies dissolve, and they disappear. And what happens is you have a feeling of dissolving and melting into what is known as space-like equipoised samadhi, concentration. And the stress and the tension, internal stress and tension requiring this tremendous effort internally and concentration sort of releases itself because it also dissolves and melts. and you have a feeling of release and freedom, as if you are infinite space and everything else is infinite space. You don't feel like you're just you and you stopped looking and now you're going to float in space. That would be fake. Although you could conjure such a feeling. No, you have gone to the diamond core of your sense of absoluteness about yourself, and this has imploded upon itself, and this has melted itself, and therefore you would just, in a way, you're not released in space. You become space. Space. You realize you always were space, so there's no fear involved with it. Actually, therefore you can't fall into space because you are the space. And it is a wonderful thing, and actually it could be mistaken for enlightenment, but it isn't. But it is an enlightening experience when experienced viscerally. It is said to be also like water being poured in water. If we don't want the heat and the drilling and the sort of power metaphors, we go like the soft metaphor, water being poured in water. It's called a visceral experience of emptiness of a type. And however, and this is critically important, while it is something pleasurable and enjoyable, the release of the tension of the seeking and the not finding, we don't want to find the space. There's a tremendous danger here that we will, although in a way we lose our discursive thought in this spaciousness. We don't think. There's no more thought followed there. But there's a danger of thinking that because we remember the threshold, in a way, and then there will be a threshold of leaving this state. So we will be thinking that when we were in the state, that was the absolute we were in touch with. And so therefore that state is the absolute. And that would be very, very wrong. Because you couldn't, if it's absolute, you can't enter it and leave it at a time, at 2 times. It cannot have a doorway. It cannot have not existed before and now exist and be absolute. Absolute means non-relational. And when you experience something, you relate to it. Even if you experience it with a sense of dissolving yourself, so that you don't experience it in a subject-object dualistic way, you still come to the experience, and therefore it's relational, you have related to it. What happens is like, it's a momentum thing. The momentum of your critical wisdom looking for this absolute, without thinking any further thought. This momentum sort of carries you where this spacious feeling, as relieving and releasing as it feels, you do not be attached to, because in a way your critical seeking evaluates the spaciousness as if, is it the absolute? But without your thinking that sentence or that thought. And of course it cannot find itself. The spaciousness does not find itself, cannot verify itself. And the minute when that happens, the spaciousness in a sense disappears, or rather, the spaciousness becomes like space, open to all differentiated things again, such as yourself having been in a state of equipoised space-like samadhi, such as yourself being in what is known as the aftermath illusion-like samadhi, or dream-like samadhi, where you re-perceive yourself as a boundaried entity of body-mind complex, and you re-perceive the sort of world around you as it seems to re-enter your awareness, and you re-perceive, although things look, and they don't even necessarily look that different, just like as when you look at a reflection of something in the mirror, it looks like itself, but you simultaneously know that it's not the thing itself, it's the reflection of the thing in the mirror. So suddenly that's why it's called illusion-like or dream-like, because all of differentiated reality in which you still are a relational subjective agent, an experiencer, and a conscious being, but all of that is like reflections in the surface of the vast infinite mirror of emptiness, of the spaciousness. So space and the things in the space are no longer opposite. They are, space is the things in the space. Things in the space are the space. And so you realize this is being, the illusion like aftermath samadhi is like experiencing the world like it was a matrix experience, where you are conscious that it is a matrix experience at the same time as you are engaged in the experience. And this illusion like aftermath samadhi is sort of more enlightened in a way than the space like equipoise samadhi, but in another way it's no different from the space like equipoise samadhi, because you're there, it's like when you look at your face in a mirror and you maybe put on your face, you put on your lipstick or you put on your sunblock or you whatever you do, and you move your hand to touch your face. You don't move your hand to touch the thing in the mirror, but you don't think, oh wait, you don't stop yourself with the thought, oh that's the mirror, so wait, I better do over here. And so you don't have to think anything, because you simultaneously know that the face in the mirror is not the face. And yet you can engage with the mirror reflection and you can deal with the face. So your whole life becomes like that. You even will still feel, I'm me. After only one time through that experience of not finding the self and then exploding into the diamond awareness of infinite space-like consciousness, and then exploding that as if that were some ultimate, and realizing that your experience of that anyway is a relational, and then coming back with the mirror-like into reflected nature of things. Both awarenesses become part of you, although they're not fully, totally part of you in a certain way. You sort of oscillate back and forth, and subsequently you sort of forget even the depth of that space-like thing. You begin to feel like, I'm really me, and what was that I experienced? And there's layers and levels and levels and levels that you deepen and deepen that as you are engaged compassionately with the illusion-like differentiated world of other beings and things. And you're deepening your awareness of the spaciousness and the freedom of all of that. And at the same time, you're engaged specifically with the responsible and responsive and sensitive interaction with the causal details of all of that. This is then the cultivation of the non-dual wisdom and compassion enlightenment. But the first experience of it should never be mistaken as the ultimate. So we have, as we rehearse this, the Guru Rinpoche and Shakyamuni Buddha and Tsongkhapa and the Dalai Lama and Jesus and Moses and Lao Tzu and Confucius and Krishna and Shankaracharya, whoever it is, Ramana Maharshi, all of them are thrilled. Sri Aurobindo, they're all thrilled with us. They bless us with their light. And our light shines out to all the beings around us, all the loved ones at home, all the ones we don't know, all the other ones. And we've had like a first sort of rehearsal circuit through what is known as the 4 keys. Actually, only 3 of the 4 keys we've done so far. When we came into the space-like awareness, it was when we had the realization known as the realization of the freedom of the true unity of that absolute self, imagined and felt, experientially felt absolute self, and the body-mind processes. And that was the realization of the 3rd key. The 4th key, again, is something different. It's where because then when we come back in the space like that, after that, when the illusion-like thing, then our mind throws up to us and says, well, wait a minute, I got into that space-like thing, that was all very nice, it was fun, it was a great release, it was a gas, I felt it was very deep, now I see things in a new way. Or that, I'm a little more open about the matrix-like, mirror-like, dream-like, illusion-like nature of things. But on the other hand, maybe that I still feel that absolute self somewhere. I'm still me. I did it. Bob did it. And so maybe Bob is something. I was looking in the wrong place. I was looking as a unitary Bob with my body-mind processes of consciousness through material, physical, through mental, subtlest mental, with emotion and concept and sensation in between, the 5 systems, and that was too wrong. Of course, that was wrong because the body-mind processes are a changing relational bunch of processes, including all the mental processes. And so, sure, I didn't find that absolute self as a true unity, but you know what? That absolute self might be hovering above like a helicopter. My bobness might be just sort of outside, like 3 inches behind my heart chakra, or, deep somewhere in the 11th dimension, or, some other place up in heaven, or in the mind of God, or whatever. I might be just manipulating my body-mind processes by my absolute self, sort of like, like in 2001, that big black stone just suddenly just produced 11 million suns. The big black stone they were all worshipping there, and the gorillas. That's the absolute thing in the middle of everything, controlling everything, showing perfectly the misknowledge concept, how an absolute thing can control relative things. Which reflects our misknowledge that there's an absolute thing at the core of our relational being, which is the absolute us. So I'm not satisfied with not having found freedom from true unity of the self, or true sameness of the self and the body-mind processes, because I now say, okay, Buddha, I have one more challenge. I'm going to find a true different self, absolute self that's going to be related to these relative body-mind processes and still going to be myself, but it's not going to be unity. Okay, I give that up, but I'm going to find it as a truly different thing. So then we go back through the whole thing. We've sort of got our body-mind processes sort of as a surveyable set of schemas in our mind, and we then think of 4 types of relationship: possession, location, presence, and being in, that is to say, and being a ground, and being a basis. So foundation, possession, location, and presence. In other words, if that absolute I, me, the real solid self, that's an absolute unchanging thing that I must find that's absolutely real, is unquestioned, and Buddha's wrong to say there is no such thing, because I feel myself being like that too strongly, couldn't be wrong, Buddha's wrong. He's just teasing me. Then either that absolute self of mine possesses this body-mind processes, because that's how I'm Bob, or it is the foundation of these body-mind processes, like my body-mind is like operating sort of on top of the great vast self, or it's contained within them, it's present within them, my body-mind processes, but yet separate from them, or it owns them, like an owner, like an absentee landlord. And then you have all these weird things in world mystical traditions, like a silver cord, that goes from here and up there. Somebody with it. And then people come up with the most amazing things. Woody Allen had a good one where there was like a bunch of pilots in the brain looking out through the eyeballs, like steering the robot, Remember? And then Woody bailed out to be a sperm, remember? And he left Burt Reynolds running the robot. So those are all images of the self as other than the body-mind processes, and yet being the self of the body-mind processes. But what happens when we meditate, and we go through these things one by one, and we won't rehearse it this time, maybe next time. We will get to it a little too tired. We went through the whole thing with this 3rd key, but the 4th key is where we go through possession and foundation and location and presence. And we realize that anything relating to relational things, through being their foundation, or through being their owner, or through being their nature, or through being contained within them, or present within them, the sense of being present or located or possession or foundation, all of those things relativize the absolute thing. If myself is contacted by my relative processes, through which it has to be myself, then it's a relative thing. You can't contact an absolute thing has to have no relation to be non-relational. And we sort of viscerally go through all the pictures that our mind can throw up of possession and location and presence and so on. And all those pictures suddenly show a little cord attaching to the absolute, or the absolute being constrained within a particular little space, or the absolute being a ground on which something rests. And all of those pictures explode under that analysis. And then we go through the same, and we do it in a visceral way, though, so in a powerful way, so we go through the same, we go into space like equipoise samadhi through realizing the freedom from a true difference of self and body-mind processes, of true otherness, freedom from true otherness. And then we realize that we avoid the last temptation, which is seeing the vast space-like experience being the truly other absolute thing. And we realize that the relativizing connection there was where the relative body-mind process, the relative consciousness, went into that spaciousness experience, and leaves that spaciousness experience and goes back into the delusion-like aftermath experience. And that makes it not a suitable absolute self. It relativized. And we then, going through that, we realize the fourth key, which is the freedom from the true otherness or true plurality or true difference of self and life, self and body-mind processes. So we've had our first run-through of what's called Vibhishana, which is what the word vipassana in Pali really refers to. Something way deeper than mere mindfulness, although in the same line of mindfulness. But this is like drilling through, penetrating, piercing through to freedom from substantializing anything, objectifying anything, identifying in some intrinsic, realistic way anything, reifying anything. And that is the true realization of selflessness we have then achieved in relation to the person in this case. And we do the same thing in relation to things also, to the rock, to the atom, to the universe, to the table, to the foot, to the chair, to the knuckle, to the bone, whatever it is. We go through the same meditative, one-pointed thought process, thought experiment, and each experiment deepens our realization of personal or subjective and objective selflessness, meaning the freedom from this type of delusionary personal subject or delusionary objective essence in anything. And as we deepen this and as we go deeper and deeper into this, we achieve nirvana, really. This is the real doorway of nirvana. We realize nirvana. But nirvana, of course, we realize it in a way, we don't realize it in some blinding flash necessarily, because that involves the false image of nirvana being like that space-like state, of some state apart from the world. So we actually realize nirvana by that false absolute self being dissolved slowly but steadily by our critical awareness, sort of circling around it and drilling through it from all different directions and having it dissolve in this way and that way and the other way. And it gradually sort of like melts and dissolves to where we finally become a truly self-aware relational being and truly free of that absolutizing habit, which is the shell, like the snail shell within which we suck our being back into and sort of put a boundary between itself and other and like try to hide away from all this terribly frightening universe. So that nirvana, therefore, is more like a butter melting in a broth, Atisha said. It's more like pressing the wrinkles out of a cloth, with a steam iron, with a hot stone, actually, in the ancient metaphor, like making a wrinkle-free cloth by slowly pressing out the wrinkles. It isn't just like some big light bulb pop-off thing. All too often, the light bulb pop-off thing, which you can have experiences, but they get reified as, I got the absolute there. Oh, that was the absolute. Then you sort of go around the relative world depreciating it because you think you got the absolute back there that you touched on, or you'll get it after you die, or you'll get it when you meditate for another 10 years, or you go on the 40-year retreat, or when the great guru gives you the blessing, or whatever baloney thing and gimmick is thrown up to you by whatever distorted ideology. Whereas meanwhile, the absolute thing is the complete melting into the infinite relational thing, where wisdom and compassion are indivisible. Where you become the indivisible truth body of all Buddhas and the form body of yourself as one of the Buddhas. How about it? So we got blessed because we just thought about it. And even an imperfect person like me who still didn't get it was able to help you run through it by reading the things and studying and remembering the things of people who did get it.